What's going on, gang? Today's forecast is partly cloudy with a chance of nuclear fire, a little bit of turbulence, World War III, perhaps. Israel has struck Iranian nuclear facilities, and Iran has counterattacked with drones, kind of. Wasn't very effective. Seems like they're getting some support from Pakistan right now. Trump has issued an ultimatum on the situation, and as of most recently, has said we will not get militarily involved. But this still feels pretty close. Still feels pretty touch and go. Let's dive into what happened. And before all that, I'd like to say please give this video a like, share, subscribe, support me on Patreon if you want. I can't cover this particular topic without a lot of people getting angry or risking getting in trouble on YouTube. It's a sensitive and developing situation, so just bear with me and understand the boundaries that are at play when discussing a topic of this nature. Anyway, let's go ahead. So, where the situation stands now is that over the past couple of days, we've seen President Trump threatening the life of the leader of Iran, suggesting that Iran, or asserting that Iran has nuclear weapons, telling people to evacuate Tehran, and also saying that he's against regime change. So, this is still like a lot of very alarming mixed signals. Um, this apparent pivot towards neoconservatism on Trump's part has definitely exposed some cracks in his base. And these could be very long lasting, if not devastating, if there are boots on the ground in Iran. A significant portion of people voted for Trump with the expectation that he would fulfill the mandate of no more foreign wars. And this isn't like some of the other things where he always made a kind of non-committal statement, or it was vague what his real position actually was, if he was going to do it or not. Like, this was a clear part of his mandate for a lot of people. But because Israel is actually so centrally involved in this conflict in a way that it wasn't as clearly in any prior U.S. conflict in the Middle East, a lot of people, particularly on the evangelical right, will see an intervention like this as justified. They won't see this as an extension of the wasteful American imperial project in the Middle East. Needless to say, I do not want boots on the ground in Iran. I do not want the U.S. participating in a war with Iran at all. I think it would be devastating to the GOP's prospects here at home, and I think it would set back the conservative movement like very, very, very far. So I'm just going to go ahead and give my own sort of dispassionate analysis of the geopolitical situation over there. Now, Israel has always been in a precarious position geopolitically. Its very existence is kind of like artificially redirecting the course of a river. It's naturally surrounded by a bunch of people who really don't want it there. And theoretically, if there were total solidarity among these people, which has always been a lofty and tenuous project, but not totally unheard of with all the pan Arabist movements, but Israel could be overwhelmed and swarmed by them in a matter of days. So it's high stakes because if that were to happen, their population would be decimated and they would be left without an ethnic homeland. The only thing that keeps them alive is continued support by the US. And, the US sort of picked up the torch from the UK, who is the originally in control of colonial Palestine, I think it was, as it was once called. From a neoconservative and neoliberal perspective, Israel is the means by which the U.S. power projects into the Middle East and is therefore a cornerstone of the reigning Anglo liberal world order. And as I'm sure you're well aware, the American political class, as a general rule, is very interested in acting to defend this relationship. I mean, needless to say, personally, I don't want a war over this. I think these two countries can sort things out among themselves. And I am hoping that Trump is good on his word because recently he's apparently said we won't militarily intervene. But I'm not holding my breath. I do know that just from a general Not that I really agree with it, but just a general practical perspective, Iran gaining nuclear weapons is pretty much a non starter. Like, under any administration, if enough people became convinced that Iran had nuclear weapons, there would be war. No matter who it is, that is simply where the Overton window is on this issue. MAGA doesn't want another Middle Eastern war. Like, for instance, Charlie Kirk doesn't even want another Middle Eastern war. But under pretty much any administration, if Israel forced this issue or Iran actually acquired nuclear weapons, the U.S. would become involved. And I think if ultimately Israel decides there will be a war, there will be a war, and we will be backing them up. And just from the perspective of optics in regards to American culture's view of the Arab world, whether or not you personally feel their cause is valid or not, terrorist organization is still pretty much an adequate description of Hamas in the average American's mind. Israel's response to Gaza may have been massive overkill. Probably most Americans acknowledge that at this point. But Americans still have a fundamental disinclination from supporting Palestine and Hamas outside of the sort of radical progressive lefties you may see. Hamas simply can't beat the aesthetics of the fact they look like ISIS guys in yellow to most people, no matter how many Gazan kids they show getting blown up or starving in YouTube ads. Political support for Hamas in Gaza has also collapsed because the chain of events following their little incursion slash strike on Israel has proved to be an unmitigated disaster. At the outset of the incursion or strike on Israel, Hamas had the support of the general public in Gaza. Before all this, they would have been, it would have been adequate to describe Hamas as a legitimate expression of the political will of the Palestinians in Gaza. That is definitely not the case anymore, and most of them definitely want to tap out because Israel has really put the people who live in Gaza through the ringer. It's also worth noting that in this situation, Iran doesn't have a whole lot of allies either. China views them as unstable and unreliable, and Russia is trying to settle things in the Ukraine. The rest of the Muslim world is basically completely politically exhausted. The Egyptians live under a military government, which I'm pretty sure is backed by the West. The Saudis have probably been bought off, even if they're not happy about the situation. I think they even have some sort of weird military alliance with Israel, inexplicably. Um, Iraq has been crushed. Syria has a new government and would get crushed if it attacked Israel. And Lebanon and Jordan also can't do anything. The entire Arab world has basically been defeated, so all that's left for a lot of them to do is leave for the West. They're not politically organized enough to fight back, and I think they've lost the faith and social cohesion to believe it's a situation they can really change at the moment. Um, I do believe that there's some sort of ground invasion of Iran. American men will be getting drafted. Right. So even if nothing ever happens, this situation is still not a joke. Only like two or three things need to happen for this to actually escalate into a war. I'm not even necessarily thinking World War III, but it could be pretty close. Generationally, Israel has basically run out of time for supporters in the US. Boomers are like the last people who could get behind a conflict around something like this. Young people generally are skeptical of Israel's actions in Gaza and, as a rule, are less religious. There's been a noticeable drop in favorability across the board uh, on the part of Americans toward Israel. And there's the disinterest of the popular right and many on the left in new conflict, as well as leftists who have been incensed over recent events in Palestine. The main social basis for America supporting Israel really is evangelical Zionism, which has been thoroughly deconstructed during the course of the past culture wars. Um, the sort of freedom and democracy social case doesn't really stir the left as much because many also have an affinity for Muslims, for what they feel is the plight of Muslims. And the jingoistic fervor on the right that immediately followed 9/11 has pretty much totally faded by this point. So very soon in the emergent sociocultural landscape of America, uh, people will no longer be able to construct compelling reasons for the U.S. to support Israel. So in a sense, it's kind of like now or never, right? Like young people generally are raising an eyebrow left and right at Israel's actions in Gaza, and there are only so many boomers left. Only so many boomers who are actually like willing to go so far as boots on the ground. You know, Trump actually going in whole hog, getting behind Israel would he? You know, his base is not happy about that. This isn't even something the populist right wants, even though a significant portion of the populist right is evangelical. People, the American people, as a general rule, are tired of our involvement in the Middle East. Also, on a tangential note, there is this crazy video where apparently Israel struck one of the Iranian state broadcasting station, and you can actually see it happening in real time. Check it out.
از اینکه با ما همراه هستید آنچه که ملاحظه می‌کنید تجاوز رژیم صهیونیستی به خاک جمهوری اسلامی ایران و منطقه صدا و سیماست. آنچه که ملاحظه کردید تجاوز آشکار رژیم صهیونیستی به صدا و سیمای جمهوری اسلامی ایران است. معاونت سیاسی صدا و سیمای جمهوری اسلامی ایران هدف حمله متجاوز قرار گرفت. الله اکبر، الله اکبر، الله اکبر. مردم شریف ایران آگاه باشید، آنچه که دیدید، صدایی که شنیدید، صدای متجاوز به خاک وطن، صدای متجاوز به صدای حق و حقیقت است. آنچه که ملاحظه کردید، صدایی که شنیدید، فضای غبارآلود استودیو
All right, but let's get a little into Israel's escalation dominance and incentives on both sides in the whole situation. I mean, this situation with Iran really hit a fever pitch when Iran finally mounted a successful counterattack against Israel. My understanding is that the Iranians flooded the skies with cheap drones and then sent in hypersonic missiles. So the Iron Dome and other air defenses weren't able to stop them. It's also kind of interesting because many people in Israel live very modern lives, but then there's just totally this war zone going on right around the corner. Imagine if like cruise missiles were suddenly hitting the middle of Manhattan, people would be losing their minds. So I guess you can sort of that would give you a window for comparison of what the social climate in Israel is probably like right now. Netanyahu's position is precarious. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, he's had trouble with the ultra-Orthodox and far-right wanting to pull out of his coalition, and he's also got pressure to retaliate against Iran even harder now because everyone is existentially terrified after Iran's actually successful attack. After the first couple of months in Gaza, Netanyahu began losing favorability because people thought he wasn't doing enough in retaliation. That's not a judgment. That's just a fact. People in Israel were becoming dissatisfied with him because they felt he wasn't doing enough in response. His measures were not harsh enough for them. If I'm not mistaken, Israel has actually already killed several members in the Iranian negotiation team, and this situation is really just kind of an emergency either way with a bunch of perverse incentives, and it's kind of like a perfect storm. Iran very understandably feels threatened getting bombed like this because their entire leadership core is getting targeted. Their whole political class may get wiped out by Israel. And for them, this incentivizes reckless behavior because why not get their hands on a nuke? Most of their politicians appear to be getting bombed into oblivion either way, although Trump has apparently promised that Khamenei will not be killed if he hands himself over. Still, like, they're definitely in between a rock and a hard place, and not to mention, Pakistan seems to be their main friend in this situation. And I will remind you that Pakistan is a nuclear armed state. Pakistan does have nukes. It's also worth noting that Netanyahu had a bit of a coalition crisis immediately before strikes on Iran began, and the strikes are probably to consolidate strength back over his coalition in the Knesset, which is the Israeli Congress. Over in Israel, they always have this draft issue where the ultra Orthodox don't want to do it, but then all the secular Jews want them to because otherwise military service is compulsory. So these two parties, Shas and United Torah Judaism, these two religious nationalist parties, threatened to leave the coalition in March when a law exempting Haredi yeshiva students from mandatory military service didn't pass. So Netanyahu was initially incentivized to do these strikes against Iran to unify the coalition and public, shifting focus from domestic disputes to national security. Even Yair Lapid, leader of the party Yesh Atid, the socially liberal but still nationalist opposition party, was on board with Netanyahu's military actions against Iran. So, in short, Israel's political class has some perverse incentives to take a recklessly harsh foreign policy stance, in my opinion, regardless of whether or not the threat is real or imagined right now. Unifying your government isn't a good reason to do strikes against Iran. And Iran is already between a rock and a hard place, so of course it's going to go hard in the paint in response. As for what this means for the U.S., as I'm sure many of you know, Miriam Adelson is Trump's largest donor. She is convinced he will do whatever it takes to keep Israel safe. So, whether he wants to or not, it's not clear to me that Trump is in a position to say no if enough key figures around him really feel there need to be boots on the ground in Iran. I don't know what's going to happen. To me personally, war seems more likely than not at this point, but I'm obviously speculating here. We're just going to have to stay tuned, but I'll assume we'll get our answer about how the situation will unfold later today or in the next couple of days, perhaps weeks, but I feel like something's right around the corner. I don't know. I'd like to hear your comments. Keep it respectful, guys. You know who you are. Give this video a like, share it, and I'm sorry. I've been away for so long. I took that huge gap. I swear. I really do want to boost production. I have so many ideas. I just need to get them out and make videos. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you thought it was insightful, engaging, thought provoking, whatever. And Red Channels will catch you in the next one.